needs no introduction. And then that person proceeds to give about a 5-minute introduction. I'm not going to do that. This is Bob Mueller. He's been out here several times before. We always enjoy hearing what he has to say. I'm going to turn the microphone over to him.
Thanks for having me back, too. Thank you. And I've got a new talk for you tonight, too. Don't worry, okay?
We didn't forgot those.
It's called an attitude of gratitude. But before I do that, everybody wants to know when I go out doing talks, first of all, why do we change our name to Hosparus? Did some of y'all wonder that, why we changed our name to Hosparus? Well, what happened about 12, 15 years ago, Hospice of Louisville, Hospice of Southern Indiana, Hospice of Central Kentucky, we merged, and our new name became the Alliance of Community Hospices and Palliative Care Services, Inc. If you had a name like that, you'd change it too. It was just awful. It was just too long. But we couldn't do a geographic name because we take Southern Indiana, Louisville, E-Town, Bowling Green, just a huge area. We couldn't come up with an easy name. So we got a hold of New West. They're the ones that helped Kentucky do that slogan, Unbridled Spirit. And they helped us with our name, and the new name is Hosparus. It's a made-up Latin and Greek word. It means we guide our guests, because that's what we try to do at the end of life. We try to guide people at the end of life to make it as good as it can be. And we do all kind of things for people. We had a guy in Southern Indiana who was a fisherman, and he was pretty much bedfast, but his last wish was he wanted to go to the Ohio River and catch some more fish. So we took him down to the Ohio River so he could catch some more fish. We had a guy in E-Town who was also in his bed in his last days, but he had a model train in his basement. He wanted to play with his train one more time. We made sure he did. So we're the kind of group that does those kind of things. We want the end of life to be as good as it can be. We even changed our emblem. It's an oak leaf turning color in the fall because we deal with people at the autumn of their life. And we also changed our slogan, because the end of life is part of living. Because again, we want it to be that good. Have you seen some of our commercials lately? A lot of our commercials lately too also say, encourage people to use Hosparus sooner. Because what happens with a lot of people, they wait so late and they have us for a day or two and they could have had us for weeks or months. So that's one of the big marketing things we're trying to do, is to get people to use us sooner. Another reason we changed our name really was because of Southern Indiana. In Kentucky, it's all nonprofit hospices. Like, we're the only hospice in all of Kentucky in our particular area, and it's Hosparus. Here in Indiana, Hosparus was Hospice of Southern Indiana. In New Albany, there's our office there on Market Street, but there's also for-profit hospices here in Indiana. There's Vista Care Hospice and Medicis Hospice, and they're the for-profits. They do good work too, but we do a lot more. We try to make sure we work with people as they go through their grief and their loss. We take children patients. We do so much more that way. We're the nonprofit, and that's our goal, is to reach out to everybody. Sometimes the other hospices will send people to us for bereavement care. But again, we're there because we want to be and do those kind of things. So that's another reason we changed our name. The other big news here in Southern Indiana is we're building a new building. Maybe some of you all know that. It's going to be out near IU Southeast on Hofstelt Lane there, right next to Fire King. You might see the groundbreaking that's already happening there. And by the end of the year, we're going to have a new building and move from our site there on Market Street there in New Albany to our new building, because we've totally outgrown it. We've just gotten that much bigger. When I was here last time, I would have told you that we have about 500 or 600 patients on a daily basis. This morning, the number of patients we're serving is 830. That's how much bigger it's gotten. So those are just some things that have changed at Hosparus since I was here last time. The other thing that's changed last year, we have our inpatient unit down at the old Methodist Hospital there in Louisville, Martin's Pavilion. It's on the 6th floor. We had 12 beds there. We expanded to 15, but the unit looked like it was built in the 1960s. And one of the things we've done now is expanded to 25 beds. We've totally modernized all the rooms. So we have a whole new facility there for people that need to be in the hospital at the end of life in our inpatient units. That's another big change we've made. I gave you those bookmarks too. You might notice those that I passed out. And on the back of there, it's got 15 ways to get the most out of life. But I'm not going to do that talk, because last time I was here, I did that talk for you. And I know Bill remembers every word I said, so I have to make sure I don't repeat the talk. But anyway, I just thought you might enjoy these bookmarks. That's why I brought those along. Just a little bit more about myself, and some of y'all know this, some of y'all don't. I'm homegrown from this area, grew up primarily in Louisville, went to St. Anthony's my 3rd grade here in this area, and when I went through, at a very early age, Catholic seminary, and became a Catholic priest, and was a Catholic priest for 15 years, And during part of that time, I served at St. Raphael's over in Louisville, but I worked at Assumption Hospital doing retreats. So I spent a lot of time at Mount St. Francis doing retreat work too. So this area became very familiar to me, doing many different things that way. And I love being a Catholic priest, and I saw a lot of good that hospice did for a lot of our parishioners. But then I decided I wanted a life and a wife, and that doesn't work if you're a Catholic priest. I don't know if you've heard that. And then I started working at Hosparus as a chaplain, and now I'm one of the primary fundraisers there. The other thing I started doing a long time ago, and I think I've told you this before too, I started writing different articles for different publications. I'm the only man that has a column in Today's Woman. And I'm proud of that. It's always on spirituality and positive living. And so I brought a couple issues of Today's Woman that have my articles in there that I think you might enjoy. So please take some of those afterwards. In fact, 3 years ago, they had their annual banquet, and they honored people and all. And since I'm the only man that writes for them, they made me their Man of the Year. There you go. And then last year, they discontinued the award. But anyway, I've been writing them for a long time. In Oldham County, too, there's a newspaper called the Oldham Air. I'm in there all the time. So I really enjoy writing, doing motivational speaking, and it's just one of the things I also do. But you know, in fundraising, and I know John Hartstern can relate to this too, there's two things you have to do well. You have to ask, and I really do believe in ask and you shall receive. And the second thing, maybe even more important, is you have to thank. It's so important to properly thank people. And one of the things I've learned more recently, my title's changed since I was here last time too. My new title is Senior Director of Mission and Stewardship. And I really like that title, because I'm always trying to proclaim the mission of hospice and always trying to be a good steward of all the monies that we raise. But one of the things that's so important is to thank people. So I usually spend about an hour each day on the phone just thanking people. And a lot of times people can't believe I'm calling, because nobody calls them just to thank them like that. I had one guy the other day, I called him, I said, I want to thank you for your gifts to Hosparus. And he said, don't you dare thank me. Don't you dare thank me. I want to thank you for what Hosparus did for me. So he turned it on me. I was expecting to really get blown away by his comment, but he thanked me. But that attitude of gratitude makes such a difference, doesn't it? It's just so important for that to happen. Thank you for the wonderful meal. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Just to practice what I preach here, because it was terrific. But I'm amazed with all the negativity in our society a lot of times. Like you listen to the news media, for instance, and let's just go back a few years. First of all, it was O.J. Simpson, then it was Clinton Monica, then it was steroids in baseball, then it was Enron, then it was September 11th, it was the Katrina oil spill, there was all the local news. It's just constant negativity that we hear, isn't it? You know that between 1990 and 1998, the murder rate was down 20%, but the number of stories about murder was up 600%. And the day it keeps going, we hear about Penn State, the economy, the election, Hurricane Sandy, the fiscal cliff. It just goes on and on, all that negativity all the time. And I remember when I was a priest years ago at Assumption High School, sometimes the most beautiful girls and the girls that were the brightest girls at all, they had such a negative impression of themselves. And one of my jobs as chaplain was just to try to get them to feel good about themselves, because there was so much that they needed to feel good about themselves, and just to have that positive influence was so important. So I think we do that to ourselves too. We give ourselves just a sense of negativity. And a lot of times it's just how we say something, isn't it, that makes such a difference when we thank people or ask people. One thing that was on YouTube recently is, maybe you've seen it, I really like this because it shows the power of how we say something. A blind boy sat on the steps of a building with a hat by his feet. He held up a sign which said, "I am blind, please help." There were only a few coins in the hat. A man was walking by. He took a few coins from his pocket and dropped them into the hat. He then took the sign, turned it around, and wrote some words. He put the sign back so that everyone who walked by would see the new words. Soon the hat began to fill up. A lot more people were giving to the blind boy. That afternoon, the man who had changed the sign came to see how things were going. The boy recognized his footsteps and asked, "Were you the one who changed my sign this morning? What did you write?" The man said, "I only wrote the truth. I said what you said, but in a different way. I wrote, 'Today is a beautiful day, but I cannot see it.'" Both signs told that the boy was blind, but the first sign simply said the boy was blind. The second sign told people they were so lucky that they were not blind. And what a difference that made. And a lot of times it's just how we say something that makes such a difference, isn't it? That's why I wrote an article, and I've got this up here for you to take, an article called An Attitude of Gratitude. I love that phrase because it's so important for us to have an attitude of gratitude. I have a priest friend that every day he sends out one thank you note to somebody. And the reason I know that, I got one time. But isn't that a great thing to do? And I've run into some people too, when they have a birthday, they don't take gifts, they give out gifts. And another beautiful thing to do. So just all those things we can do just to show the gratitude for life, I think is just so important. You know, you need an attitude adjustment though, an attitude of gratitude adjustment if you whine and complain a lot and often contribute a negative comment about any topic. Or you frequently feel like a victim. Or you haven't enjoyed a sunrise or a sunset in the last few years. Or you have trouble getting started in the morning. Or you have trouble enjoying the present moment. Or you have resentment about events in the past. It's so important for us to have an attitude of gratitude, isn't it? Another article I wrote is an article called Thanks Living. Not Thanksgiving, but Thanks Living, that we live with an attitude of thanks. And when I wrote this article, I started with a story. It goes like this. A farmer brought a load of wheat to the grain elevator in a nearby town. He stopped at a restaurant and sat down near a group of young fellows who were acting up, shouting at the cook and heckling the waitresses. When his meal was set before him, the old man bowed his head in prayer. One of the smart alecks thought he would have some fun with the farmer. So he shouted in a voice that could be heard by everyone, "Hey, Pop, does everyone do that where you come from?" Calmly, the man turned toward the lad and an equally loud voice said, "No, son, the pigs don't." And I love that story because one of the things I love is the way you start your meeting here every time. You prayed and gave thanks for the meal that was so wonderful. And I think that's something that's so important for us to do, is to give thanks. We do that when we go to church. We do that before our meals. It's just a beautiful thing not to lose. And so it's just that whole concept of thanks living. Even Shakespeare said in Twelfth Night, he said, "I can no other answer make but thanks and thanks and ever thanks." Just a beautiful message for us to realize. Another thing, whenever I come to you, I always like to tell you that I love to collect quotes. I'm a great collector of quotes. And in your handout today, I've got 2 pages of my favorite quotes, and most of these are about Thanksgiving. Meister Eckhart said this. He said, "If the only prayer you ever say in your life is thank you, it would be enough." I like that. If we just do that, that's enough. Another quote I love, it's kind of long, but it's a great quote by George Bernard Shaw. He said this: "This is a true joy in life. The being used for a purpose recognized by yourself is a mighty one. The being thoroughly worn out before you're thrown in the scrap heap. The being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish, little clod of ailments and grievances complaining the world will not devote itself to make you happy." Isn't that a great quote? Because a lot of times you see people like that, they get so obsessed with their own complaints and grievances, they don't reach out. That's another thing I love about groups like Optimist. You aren't reaching out. You're doing good things. You're making a difference. You're not complaining. You're having that attitude of gratitude, basically. That's why I love that quote. Some other good quotes. I love this quote. You know the guy who wrote all the fairy tales, Hans Christian Andersen? He said this. He said, "Everyone's life is a fairy tale written by God's finger." Everyone's life is a fairy tale written by God's finger. What a powerful quote. Every time I read that, I feel better. Have you ever heard this one? This is an anonymous quote. "An optimist goes to the window every morning and says, 'Good morning, God.' The pessimist goes to that same window and says, 'Good God morning.'" What did you say this morning when you saw this weather? Did you say good morning, God? Or did you say good God morning? Another quote I love is by Jacob Broad, who says, "Consider how hard it is to change yourself when you understand what little chance you have of trying to change others." Another one, Casey Stengel. Remember Casey Stengel, the old New York Yankee baseball manager? He said this: "It's easy to get good players. Getting them to play together, that's the hard part." And Ruth Brilhart said, "The best thing to do behind a friend's back is to pat it." I love Anita Roddick's quote, who said, "If you think you're too small to make a difference, you haven't been in bed with a mosquito." John Honeyfield said, "The only people you should ever want to get even with are those who have helped you." And a quote that really fits us at Hosparus, and I think is really true of the work we do, is this: "You may forget with whom you've laughed, but you will never forget those with whom you've wept." Because a lot of times that's what we do. We're there to weep with people as well as laugh with them. And it's so important to be able to do that too. Another good hospice quote is, "Grief shared is grief spared." Because a lot of times if you're going through grief and you can share that with somebody else, what a difference that makes. So grief shared is grief spared. Another quote by Ann Richards said this: "Learn to enjoy your own company. You're the one person you can count on living with for the rest of your life." So it's so important, I think, to take a good quote like that, and I've got 2 pages like that for you. Just read those, and hopefully just by reading those, it'll give you a sense of an attitude of gratitude. Something else I know this group is blessed with is just an incredible sense of humor. And that's something at Hosparus. A lot of people will ask me sometimes, well, they'll say, well, Bob, how can you work at Hosparus? Isn't that depressing? Really, it's very rewarding work. But one of the things we have is just a really healthy and probably sometimes very sick humor. And it kind of gets us through. So that's why whenever I come, I like to tell a few of my most recent jokes that hopefully you haven't heard. Like this one. Squirrels had overrun 3 churches in town. After much prayer, the elders of the first church determined that the animals were predestined to be there. Who were they to interfere with God's will? Soon the squirrels multiplied. The elders of the second church decided they could not harm any of God's creatures, humanely trapped the squirrels and set them free outside of town. 3 days later, the squirrels were back to church. It was only the third church that succeeded in keeping the pest away. The elders baptized the squirrels and registered them as members of the church. Now they only see them on Christmas and Easter.
That's a good one.
Okay, here's one about Jesus and Satan. Jesus and Satan were having an ongoing argument about who was better on the computer. They had been going at it for days, and frankly, God was sick and tired of hearing all the bickering. Finally, fed up, God said, that's it, I've had enough. I'm going to set up a test that will run for 2 hours, and from those results, I will judge who does the better job. So Satan and Jesus sat down at the keyboards and typed away. They moused, they faxed, they emailed with attachments, they downloaded, they did spreadsheets, they wrote reports, they created labels and cards. They created charts and graphs. They even did some genealogy reports. They did every job known to humankind. Jesus worked with heavenly efficiency, and Satan was faster than hell. Then 10 minutes before their time was up, lightning suddenly flashed across the sky, thunder rolled, rain poured, and of course the power went off. Satan stared at his blank screen and screamed every curse word known in the underworld. Jesus just sighed. Finally, electricity came back on. Each of them restarted their computers. Satan started searching frantically, screaming, it's gone, it's all gone, I lost everything when the power went out. Meanwhile, Jesus quietly started printing out all of his files from the past 2 hours of work. Satan observed this and became irate. Wait, he screamed, that's not fair, he cheated. How come he has all his work and I don't have any? God just shrugged and said, Jesus saves. You figured that one out, Bill, didn't you?
Yeah.
Okay, here's a couple more quick ones. One morning I found a beautiful long stem rose lying by the kitchen sink. Even though the flower was plastic, I was thinking how after all the years we've been married, my husband could still make such a wonderful romantic gesture. Then I noticed a love note lying next to it. Dear Sue, it read, don't touch the rose. I'm using the stem to clog the drain. A Sunday school teacher decided to have her class memorize one of the most quoted passages in the Bible, Psalm 23. She gave the youngsters a month to learn the chapter. Little Ricky was so excited about the task, but he just couldn't remember the psalm. There were 118 words in it. After much practice, he could barely get past the first line. On the day the kids were scheduled to recite Psalm 23 in front of the congregation, Ricky was so nervous. When it was his turn, he stepped up to the microphone and said proudly, the Lord is my shepherd, and that's all I need to know. One of the things as a fundraiser I've had a chance to do almost every year, they have an international conference for fundraisers. I usually get a chance to go to it. It always gets me all fired up, and I'm dangerous for at least a month after that. But it really does get me revved up. But they usually bring in great speakers. Like one year we had Jane Goodall, the person so much into animal care and animal concerns. And she gave a great image. She said, I can't look at the eyes of these animals, or look at the eyes of this homeless person in the inner city, or look at these eyes of this dying person in a hospice and not want to do something. What a great image. That was her message. And if you haven't read any of her memoirs that she's written here now at the end of her life, they're powerful books, Jane Goodall. Then in Baltimore a couple of years ago, we had Archbishop Desmond Tutu speak, and he was powerful. There were about 6,000 people in the building. He came to the microphone, and he went to the microphone, and he just stood there. He's real short, and he just stood there for about a minute and just smiled at everybody. That's all he did. He just smiled at everybody for about a minute. Then he went into a beautiful talk about apartheid. It was fairly heavy, but very interesting about what had happened in South Africa during that whole time with Nelson Mandela. It was a great speech. But then right at the end of that, he just stopped again, and he went in a very high voice and he said, hey, 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 why can't we get along with each other? That's all God wants. Hey, don't y'all get it? And then he just stopped, he smiled for another minute, and just walked off the stage. It was so powerful just to hear his words. So sometimes